Welcome to the Worship Collective podcast. The Worship Collective exists to unify and enrich the church through worship education, outreach, and community. And if it looked like I was trying to remember what it was, I was. This is a new mission statement for us, but I think it very accurately reflects the breadth of what we're here to do. We hope this podcast fulfills a little bit of that education and a little bit of that community side of it. My name's Grubbs.
I'm Caleb.
Are you not going to say your last name?
Ford.
Online, are you? Okay, because you didn't last time. It's okay.
I'm going to have the mission statement memorized by the time we're done with this.
I'm trying. So I'm very excited about this episode specifically. This particular topic was made me realize I wanted to start a podcast. And we're about to go absolutely ham. You're not ready for this conversation.
I hope I don't disappoint.
Okay.
So you have big expectations for this.
The question that we want to answer today is, do worship leaders need college?
No.
Thank you. Okay, we're done.
This has been the Worship Collective podcast.
You know what? I'm going to give a more nuanced answer than that because that's what the people came for. So I'm excited about this conversation. I want you to recognize, Worship Collective, we have an emphasis on worship leaders. I think that what I have to say here applies broadly to anyone in ministry, okay?
Yeah.
Anyone in vocational ministry, should you go to school. This is the conversation that we're going to have. Did you look at the bullet points at all? Kind of just skim through them?
Yeah.
And you were that could be interesting.
Yeah, I've got some ideas. I think just to set the stage, too.
Well, they're my bullet points,
You're in the middle of your doctorate
Yes,
program.
okay. So, I have my master's in worship. I'm working on my doctorate. And that isn't to flex. That's just to put in context where we're at.
And I have not done any ministry college at all.
What's the extent of college that you've done?
I have gotten close to finishing my AA. So that's we're talking furthest I've gotten actual finished is high school diploma. In business. So it's not even in ministry, it's not near ministry. All of my training is on the job. So
you'll probably be crying by the end of this discussion.
Yeah.
No, so you do youth and worship ministry.
Yeah.
I do worship and youth ministry. And I put them in that order specifically because it seems like in your local church position, your focus is more so on youth.
Yeah, and I'm not even assigned to worship necessarily.
Correct.
I just serve on the worship team.
Right.
So
exactly.
I play.
But that
keys
counts.
And whatever.
We like the volunteers too.
Worship lead, but I do not. I worship. I'm one of many worship leaders that rotate.
Yeah.
And then I'm the youth pastor on staff.
Right.
And so. Yeah.
So I started as the worship pastor on staff at my church, and then later they were like, "Hey, we need youth too." I was like, "I'm gonna do it," and now I'm doing both. But
Sick.
Most of my time still ends up going towards worship.
Yeah. So we are opposites. Then.
Yeah. And so we have a very small youth ministry here, and that's because of where we're located.
Yeah.
We're not really expecting or trying to make it anything bigger. We just want a good, consistent program for the students who are here. So. I organize that gathering, but a lot of my time is focused on. And I went from serving at a church that was literally a coffee shop church plant where it's just acoustic guitar and myself, to serving at a church with 10 people in the tech team, 10 people in the band, a 20-person choir, a lot more than just me and a guitar, and coordinating all these details. And so that's when I actually decided I was going to continue my education beyond my master's and dig a little bit deeper. And I also discovered the work of Bob Weber, who founded the school that I'm going to. You're going to hear me talk about him a lot on this podcast and reference a lot of other great books and resources and stuff. Because really our goal with the Worship Collective, we talked about this a little bit on the last episode, is to take this stuff that a lot of people don't get unless they're in their master's or their doctorate and just make it more accessible for everybody. Yeah. And that ties into this exact conversation, is do worship leaders need college? So first I wanted to talk about, in general, we're going to set the stage, but where I end is not where I think you'll expect me to end. Okay. So first I want to set the stage that there is a need for education in the modern evangelical church.
Agreed.
Big time.
Yeah.
And I get the response often, I've heard the response there's two silly responses that I'm just gonna come after it. It's time. One, is people will say that, well, the disciples, they didn't go to college and they did ministry with Jesus. That's pretty silly.
That's my favorite one.
And I'll tell you why. There's a couple reasons this is silly. One, the idea of discipleship, John Mark Comer talks about this in his recent book, Practicing the Way, is discipleship, a better translation, English translation of that word would be apprenticeship. They were apprentices to Jesus. And the idea of apprenticeship in that time was the equivalent of going to school. It was the equivalent of a graduate degree. So they were basically, not only were they getting their master's,
they're doing like practicum on it.
They were getting their master's degree from Jesus. Yeah. Right? Like, it doesn't get better than that, buddy. Yeah. So they were educated. They were trained.
Won college at that point.
Like on the job training. Like by the guy,
The guy.
The other thing is, we are thousands of years removed from the time, the language, the culture of the Bible. And so to understand the Bible, we have to be scholarly about that. We have to be academic about that. There's an academic approach that's necessary to teach and understand the Bible well. And let me tell you, there's a lot of preachers out here who demonstrate in their preaching that they don't have that academic rigor in the way that they prepare. They're just kind of spewing things. And so I appreciate when pastors have that education. I think it's important. And that translates to worship as well. It's not just for preachers. Like anybody who's leading in ministry and teaching, and worship is teaching. When we lead worship, the prayers, the liturgies, the songs, whatever it might be, that is teaching. You are discipling the church. And so you should have some training, some formal education. It's necessary. And the response I get to this a lot is, and this one also is very silly, and it makes me a little frustrated sometimes, is we don't need to like an interpretation of the Bible. I just read the Bible. I just take it for what it says. I'm not interpretations. It's just there. That translation you're reading is an interpretation of the Bible. So, like, unless you're reading the original Greek and Hebrew, I don't want to hear that. That is silly. Again, we're thousands of years removed. It's different culture, different time, different language. We have to interpret it. Anything that we say about the biblical text is an interpretation. And there are tools that we're given in seminary and Bible college as we study these things to help us come to as accurate of an interpretation as possible, because we're given the context and the tools that we need to do that. But why do we think we have so many different denominations? Why? Because people are trying to figure this thing out. It's not simple. And we're going through a series in youth right now on the Apostles' Creed that just lays out the essential doctrines of the faith. The Trinity, Jesus crucified, risen, and coming again. Basically saying, these are the essentials. This is the core of the faith. Everything outside of this is secondary, and that's why there's denominations who have different views on baptism and communion and speaking in tongues. And guess what? They're all our brothers and sisters in Christ. That's always been a huge thing for us with Worship Collective, is unity, that kind of ecumenical spirit. And I think that's just an example of, like, we're all interpreting, and we're all doing our best here. And there's a couple of things that we need to hold on to, mainly centered around the person of Jesus. There's a lot of other stuff we need to be open to conversating and learning about, but we want to do that with intellectual honesty. We want to do that well. We don't want to just say stuff. So how do we develop a theology? There's two ways, and we're going to discuss these in the next couple episodes. We're actually going to break each of these down individually. But we develop our theology biblically, so from the Bible, and historically. In the history of the church and the tradition that's been passed down to us. So really, like worship renewalists, people who are going to school to learn like that aspect of worship, are both biblical and historical scholars, because church history comes to bear on our worship. And some people don't like that because they're like, I don't need tradition, I don't need religion, I don't need... It doesn't matter. If you're worshiping with other Christians, church history is bearing on what you're doing today, whether you realize it or not. And so it's a good thing to at least be aware of. And what I find often in grad school, when you get to the master's and the doctorate side, a lot of this stuff that I'm saying like isn't super accessible, and we want to make it more accessible. Often what's lacking for people is the historical side. Okay? If you get a 4-year degree at a Bible college, or even just a Christian college, maybe you go to a school like Liberty and you get a business degree, but you're going to take a couple Bible classes. Yep. What will happen a lot of times is you're getting the biblical side, you're not so much getting the historical side, and often what is happening is the schooling that you're getting has a denominational skew. So if you're going to go to Liberty, there's a Southern Baptist leaning that you're going to get. If you go to any of these other schools, there's a denomination that's backing that school, and you're going to get a lot of that. You're not going to so much get a holistic understanding of the global church, Big C church. And that's where a lot of grad programs are more inclusive of other denominations, giving you more of a broader perspective. My cohort, for my degree that I'm working on right now, I have everyone there is from a different denomination, and I also have people from like other countries. I have people from Hong Kong and Romania, and like I'm getting Ethiopia. I have all these different perspectives coming to bear, and I'm learning things that I never would have learned in a 4-year degree at a Baptist college. I never would have even talked about, So I think there's a lot of value in learning, and we talked about this on the last episode too, of learning in a context where you're with other believers.
Yep.
From different traditions, different denominations. You're going to challenge each other. So that's where people look at undergrad versus grad school. Should I go to a Christian college? And, what you're going to find is oftentimes the bachelor's programs are going to be limited, have a denominational bias, and then and they're pretty surface level. And grad school is going to give you a little bit more to offer. Here's my practical advice to somebody who really wants to go to school. Get a business degree at St. Pete College or like wherever your local community college. Don't waste a bunch of money trying to go. A lot of these Christian schools are expensive. You want the campus experience or whatever. I'm going to be honest with you. It's not worth it. It's not worth having school debt, especially if you want to go into ministry, because you're never going to pay it off. So go to your local community college, get a business degree. So one, the statistics of people who are having to work bivocational or choosing to work bivocational, so they have another job and they're also in ministry, is huge. You want to have opportunities outside of the church. That's actually one thing I greatly regret, because I've only gone to Christian schools.
Yeah, sure.
And I have no experience and no credentials in anything but ministry. And I often think, what would happen if churches just decided they didn't like me anymore? Which I hope doesn't happen. I'm trying to keep everybody happy, but what am I gonna do? I don't want to go work at McDonald's. Maybe Chick-fil-A. I'd consider that, but my point is, I wish I'd gotten. But and a lot of pastors that have mentored me have told me early on, like, you should get a business degree. You should do something that's going to give you more options. And I didn't do that. So that's kind of my advice to other people. Like, just do that and then get your master's from a seminary. Because you're going to get a lot more value out of that than out of the undergrad at a Christian school. It's going to be more broad. It's going to go more in depth. And it's going to help you a lot. The other aspect that people will talk about is in-person versus online. I did mostly online because it was cheaper and it afforded me a lot more flexibility. I was able to work full-time, get out of school debt-free. And that's a big, don't go into debt. If you want to go to school, you're trying to do worship ministry, don't go into debt doing it. Please. Please. I think in person, you get a little bit more out of it. And what I love about Institute for Worship Studies, where I'm going, is it's a hybrid program. At the beginning of each semester, we have a week in-person intensive where I'm with my cohort, and then we're doing the rest of the time online. And so both have their pros and cons, but oftentimes online is going to afford you the ability to be able to work while you're doing school. I have one last thing that I want to cover, like my sort of conclusion about all of this, but those are my honest thoughts about school. Education is necessary if you're going to go into ministry. It's really, really important. You should probably do your undergrad in something different, and then maybe get your master's at a seminary, like a master's of divinity or something like that. That is my personal advice to people who have decided, I want to go to school. And if you can, do everything in your power to stay debt-free. As someone who is finishing up bachelor's, maybe thinking about the future, do you have any questions, thoughts, comments, concerns? Share them, please.
I think the risk that you run with... Okay, I'll tackle it this way first. I don't want it to sound like I'm just pushing people to school. I do think it's important. I think the risk that you run by not going to school is that your education comes with whatever your circle is, and so you miss out on that holistic experience. Because I think the key thing to remember in all of this, whether you're pastoring or worship leading or in any sort of ministry, is that our views, and whether it's denominational or personal, probably don't reflect the fullness of Jesus. I would even say guaranteed don't reflect the fullness of Jesus. Good. Like, there is no way that I fully understand him and my theology is perfect. Yeah. There's no way. Yeah. And so the problem that you can run into is that this echo chamber starts where, well, we do it this way or this is the way to go, and there's no other opinions welcome, which it's a dangerous place to be, right? Because I'm not trying to, well, actually I'll leave that one. Yeah, I think in general that's a dangerous place to be, whether it's in real life or it's in ministry or anywhere else. Yeah. Right? And so having multiple viewpoints, a wider worldview, it helps, right? The other essential. Thing, yeah. And the other thing too, I think is important is that it really does, like, schooling really does help you actually form your belief system versus just having it being fed to you, which I guess is just the second point to that same point, right? It's the idea of, like, okay, I'm gonna have the opportunity to, like, taste test a couple of different viewpoints, or have at least my views challenged, right? Yeah. And so in that way, I can maybe reevaluate personally, like, okay, where do I fall on this? Where do I fall on any of the things that we could form a theology on? Yeah. And honestly, like, it's gonna form your practical skills too. We're talking, if our main audience here is worship leaders, you're gonna have some sort of music practicality inside of your curriculum. And I was in band in high school, and I was in like, that really has built my musical foundation for worship leading now. Yeah. And so, like, I don't know that furthering my education into music would have given me, well, it would have given me more, but I don't know that it would have been super useful. It's just overflow. But even getting that, like, if you didn't get any of that formalized like musical training or class, or playing in an ensemble, like any of that stuff inside of high school or inside of any form of education, like, it's definitely a thing, and it definitely affects your ability to worship well, like on the skill and practical side of it. But even, like, we're talking about leaders, right? You need to be able to coordinate with your team. You need to be able to be you have to be leaned on in a musical way. You have to be able to make decisions. Are we going to sing this part? Which part is this? Is this note right? Are we playing the right rhythm? Like, that side of things is still really important, you know? And I think, probably a tangent, I don't want to go too far into it, but, like, I am all for a distraction-free worship environment, right? And so, like, that would be my basis for why do I need to be good at my skill. Like, well, it's because we want to provide as distraction-free an environment for people to come in and experience God. Yeah. And so, if my skill level with my craft is going to hinder that, I don't want that to be a thing. I want that to be as honed as possible, right? Yeah. And do you need to go formal to do that? Probably not. Does it help if you go that way? Of course it does, right? Yeah. Sure. So
back to my advice about going to maybe just a community college or something simple. It doesn't even have to be a Christian school for your undergrad, and then going to seminary. Maybe a music degree. I've encouraged people to do this before. Get a music degree or a music ed degree, and then go to seminary.
Or even like
because some of the Christian schools don't give you a lot of good music stuff. Some of them do, but and like everything in my master's and my doctorate is all theology.
Yeah, no music.
I didn't get any music stuff, so I regret that. Honestly, I would have gotten a music degree rather than a business degree if I could go back.
Even like just participate in like a community band or something.
Yeah, find
like,
something.
Do something.
And this leads into the last point: is alternatives to formal education.
Yeah.
If you can't go to school, if you can't afford it, you don't have the time. Maybe you're already leading worship and you're trying to figure out how do I educate myself
on
now.
The fly. Yeah.
That's why the worship collective exists.
Hey, let's go.
Not to say like we're the one-stop shop, but one-stop shop. It's getting late. Not to say we're there, but our hope is that we can be a resource to worship leaders who can't afford or don't have the time to get a formal education to get the same quality of education. I never want to just throw out an online course and say we're done. I think you should work through this stuff in community, but we want to give you resources where you could find a few other worship leaders in your area, sit down and talk through one of these books with them, and really go deep. And so there are alternatives. Listen, we're going to always be recommending books and stuff on here. We have blogs, all sorts of stuff that will help you. But read. I mean, read Bob Weber, read Constance Cherry, read Lester Ruth. Like, there's libraries. Maybe you don't even have to pay for the books, right? Like, just study to show yourself approved. Like, you don't have to, and go back to the beginning. It's true. A lot of people who say the thing about the disciples, like, didn't go to school, is like, we're adding things on. Like, if you look at the qualifications for an elder in the Bible, there's not one that says they have to have a college degree. That's because this form of education didn't exist back then. But also, it's true. You don't have to have a degree to be a pastor or a leader. Like, I don't think that biblically speaking you can make that argument.
Yeah, I agree.
But
mainly because there was no higher education in the Bible.
But you should educate yourself, and there's ways to do it. Find community. Your theology is best worked out in community. Always, always, always. Don't do that in a box, in a vacuum. Just like you were saying.
Real weird, real fast.
It gets real weird, real fast. Don't avoid that echo chamber. And you'll see the beauty and the depth. Like, just expose yourself to other denominations and traditions. I grew up Baptist. And I've felt God in a very Pentecostal church where things were very expressive and flowy and kind of all over the place. And I've felt the Holy Spirit in a Catholic Mass. And I know from experience that God is at work in His church abroad. Mm-hmm. And, I grew up kind of thinking that both the Catholics and the Pentecostals were probably not Christians because of how crazy they were. And they're on opposite ends of the spectrum.
Sure.
And I know that God's at work in both of those churches. And so for me, I want to experience, I think we have all these different denominations right now, and I truly believe that they all reflect a piece of what God is doing in His kingdom. Yeah. And eventually we're going to get to see it all together in its fullness, and I can't wait for that.
Yeah.
But in the meantime, let's learn from each other. Let's be humble. Let's find ways that we can learn from each other. So train yourself musically, train yourself theologically. It's important. You don't have to go to school. I understand maybe not everybody can, and that's literally why we started to do what we're doing. We want to provide this kind of rigorous, like really in-depth stuff to people who may not be able to access it otherwise. Because again, I don't want anybody going into college debt to do a career in ministry. That's a bad idea. So we hope that we can help in this journey. We really do.
Yeah, and this may be a basic little add-on. I know you mentioned training in the theology side of it, musically, like to hone your craft in that way. YouTube University. Like there are more.
Be careful doing the theology on there, but
Oh no, agree. Yeah.
But the music, yes.
Yeah. Like anybody can set up like a camera and a mic and post whatever they think theologically now. But musically, I mean, go after it. Like really, there's such specific things that even just in the worship genre of like, oh, how do I play the piano part for this song?
Yeah.
And it's released by the artist. You're like, oh, cool. Okay, now I know how to play that piano part, And there are all sorts of resources there.
I think this applies to both sides. There's so many free resources for you to learn. You just have to have, and that's where I think if you're trying to figure out, I could afford school, I do have the time, but do I need it? Depends on your personality and your temperament. Like if you have the discipline and the accountability in your life to do it on your own and find the resources and for me, I find having the structure and the deadlines
of school,
like helps.
Yeah.
But you may be able to learn outside of that. In fact, you may learn better outside of that structure.
Sure.
And that's okay. But learn.
Yeah.
That's the moral of the story.
I like it.
Keep learning. We love you guys. Thank you for listening.